Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 8, Emotions. Previously, we've been discussing conflict and managing a communication climate. Now we're going to be discussing emotions. In a perfect world, we would be able to rationally think through conflict and how to create a positive communication climate, and we would be able to work effectively with others. But emotions get in the way sometimes, that we feel bad, and as a result, we want to attack back. So instead, we can, by better understanding the components of an emotion, as well as some other influences that come from emotions, we will then be able to improve our emotional states within these situations, but also how to possibly make the emotions better in others. So let's dive right on in to emotions. What are they? Let's first discuss emotional intelligence. Intelligence is is to understand and manage one's own emotions and be sensitive to others' emotions. So there are two parts of this: that it's understanding and managing our emotions, but also be sensitive to others' emotions. Success depends on emotional intelligence quotient, but in general, by it does not mean being able to suppress your emotions. In fact, that is a impossible task and something that can only cause more damage. So, it is about understanding and managing them instead of controlling them. So let's first discuss the several components of an emotion. We have physiological changes, nonverbal behavior, cognitive interpretations, and visual expressions, all of which are ways that we communicate an emotion. We start with physiological changes. We feel emotions throughout the body because of this, it can impede processes that could be normally performed. Have you ever been in a moment when you were in a very intense conflict and you were sweating, your heart was racing, you weren't able to form your words because you were so mad? Those are those physiological changes. Another example of this for those gamers out there, when we feel tilted. At that point, then we may not be able to mentally function as well with those intense emotions. What do we feel when we are standing in front of a group, in front of a public speech? If we Those are not purely mental, there are also psychological changes. They can include but are not limited to sweating, difficulty breathing, dry mouth, beating heart, twitching, wringing of hands, verbal fillers, all of which are physiological changes that are, or sorry, reactions to physiological changes that can then uh, that that can communicate that emotion. We also have nonverbal behavior. We exhibit nonverbal behavior when we feel emotions. When someone when someone looks mad, they might be mad, or if they look sad. Things like that are a lot of times out of our control. And as a result, we give off that information so that other people can check in on us. We also feel emotions when we exhibit nonverbal behaviors, so it can work the other way as well. Amy Cuddy talks about the power poses, and while there is some speculation as to the truth or falsity of that assertion or that theory, there is still um, a positive correlation between experience or exhibiting positive nonverbal behaviors and then feeling more confident, at least in self reports. Next, we have cognitive interpretation. The mind plays an important role in determining how we feel. So, when we reappraise or rethink the meaning of an emotionally charged event to alter the emotional impact, that can change the way we feel about it. Did the person cut you off, or were they just running late to somewhere? Did the person step on your toe intentionally, or did they step on your toe unintentionally? Both of which can create very different reactions. Did the boss pass you up for that job promotion because they don't like you or that they don't care about you? Or was it that they felt like this other person had distinguished themselves maybe more than I did? So when we reappraise it, that is far more successful than suppressing emotions. And it also allows us to get a hold, logic away some of those especially debilitating emotions. So, by understanding that, that can be a good tool to not suppress the emotion, but just to change the emotion. And then we have verbal expression, putting the emotion into words that can help you manage them more effectively. Using specific emotional words to represent degrees of intensity can also be very helpful. A lot of times we have very limited emotional vocabularies, and as a result, what ends up happening is that everything is awesome. The moon landing is awesome, and this hot dog is awesome. That within that wide spectrum, there's not a lot of area for emotional distinction. Just like the Eskimos being able to distinguish between hundreds of types of ice and snow because they have 100 words for ice and snow, in the same way, by putting our emotions into words, we could distinguish the different types of emotions that we are feeling. And by representing degrees of intensity, we may not be hyperbolic with our emotions, that I am angry. Instead, I'm a little perturbed. Also, expressing it to others can be very useful in that self-disclosive way to make us feel better. So, we've talked about some of the components of emotions. Now we're going to be talking about the influences of emotion, which involve emotional contagion, personality, culture, gender, social convention and roles, as well as social media. So let's go ahead and dive right on in. We start with emotional contagion. Emotions spreading from one person to another. Uh, this can happen in all relationships, even those online. Have you had that person you work with that no matter what is always in a good mood? Do we end up feeling in a better mood when we work with them? Vice versa. When Steve comes into work and is all depressed about everything, everything's their fault. Nothing's their fault, but everything is going wrong. That is an emotion that can also be spread like a virus. So, when we express emotions, we want to be sure that we are showing those emotions rather than when we show those emotions, remember that we are spreading those emotions and other people can catch our emotions. Communicating your emotions can have an impact on the feelings and moods of others. Do social media posts make you feel anxious or depressed? That might be that sort of emotional contagion when other people communicate those negative emotions. We may end up feeling those same emotions too. That is very much where we strike at the heart of empathy, but could potentially be a downside of that emotional contagion. Next, we have personality. It's a powerful force, but doesn't have to govern communication satisfaction. There are those who may be more able to express their emotions. There may be people who are more shy and do not want to communicate their emotions. So, as a result, there are different types of people, and with different types of people come different ways that we express emotion. Shy people can communicate comfortably and effectively online because there's a lot less of that emotions coming to us because we do not have that nonverbal communication, and as a result, we are more that those people might feel more confident in those situations. Next, we jump into culture. Culture, same events can generate very different feelings in different cultures. Ethnicity impacts how others express emotional states and appropriate rules for expressing emotion. And in individualistic, collectivistic dynamics, impact behavior. Those can impact behavior within in-groups and towards out-groups. So there are a lot of ways that culture can affect us, and emotion is one of those as well. That if one event is acceptable in a certain culture, then there may not be an emotional reaction. Whereas an event or a situation um, that is a threat or a something that breaks our cultural norms, then we could have negative emotions about that. But even a funeral, for example, in some cultures see it as a very sad day. That's very much our culture. However, in other cultures, it is seen as a joyous event that this person is going to the afterlife or that we should celebrate their life, not to mourn their death. Next, we jump into gender. Gender roles shape the way that men and women experience and express emotions. There are gender norms. And if we were to say that they don't exist, then we would be far more impacted by them. And how should, speaking from the cultural norms, women express emotions? Women are through the gendered cultural norms are more willing and able to express emotions because that is within the stereotype of women. In the same way, men are not able to express their emotions, are more able to should be men and just suck it up, rub dirt on it. Some truth to cultural stereotype of an inexpressive male and demonstrative female regarding emotions do exist. Men and women experience the same emotions, but differ how they read and express emotions. In fact, women, because they are better able to communicate emotions, are better able to read those emotions as well. And within these cultural stereotypes, it is not because there is some physiological difference between men and women, or at least I haven't found it. But it is instead that we are expected to act a certain way with our culture. Our culture tells us how to act in many different situations, and men have different cultural expectations, women have different cultural expectations. And as a result, we end up acting it out in those ways. We also have social conventions. In the U.S., we have written rules of communication discourage direct expressions of most emotion. Or sorry, unwritten rules just discourage expressions of most emotions. We would rather act it out than to talk it out. Instead of, hey, instead of communicating, hey, you know what? What you said right there really made me mad, and I don't appreciate that. Instead, I would rather just go F you or, push them. Maybe not, actually. But there are some unwritten rules that do discourage that expression of emotion. We are also reluctant to threaten the face of others. We don't want to embarrass others in our culture. And and within social convention, we should engage in emotional labor, which are situations in which managing and expressing an emotion is appropriate and necessary. If your boss says something mean, can I then go to the bathroom and start crying? No, probably not, because the norms, the cultural norms, as well as the organizational norms, are not really don't really prescribe that behavior or say that that behavior is okay. In fact, um, news reporters have to be able to communicate the news very intense, very scary, or very sad moments without expressing emotion, trying to communicate subjectivity. There's a capacity to recognize and act on certain emotions. Capacity to recognize and act on certain emotions decrease without practice, so we should be communicating our emotions more. And lastly, we talk about social media. Social media can also affect our emotions. Online disinhibition can encourage emotional expressions online, but it can also increase outbursts and tirades because of this open disinhibition of our emotions. That we would rather say, in a situation like this, that's obviously, not appropriate, but it is also something that is very funny and that people can just sort of throw those things in there and not experience the emotional blowback that of someone, disagreeing with me or arguing with me or you know what, they may do that, but the automatic emotional nonverbal reaction is not seen. So you can't see other people's um, emotion of disagreement or nonverbal communication of um, anger or sadness. So we can feel emotional responses from online channels, but we don't usually get them. And both senders and receivers experience emotions more intensely online. So with that, those are the influences on emotional expression. Now we're going to be jumping into the next section after that.